Coming up, the NFL owners' meetings are underway. Brian Daboll speaks not only on Saquon Barkley, but also Daniel Jones. Do we have concerns that the organization is too bullish on the success of their current quarterback? Plus, what will it take for this season, not 5 seasons from now, 2024, to be successful for Big Blue? We dive in coming up next. Yes, my friends. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where you know that we are your host. Over here, Adam Marmbrecht. Over there, Andrew Mackwitz. We're healthy. We're wealthy. We're wise. We're living the best lives right now. Andy, wouldn't you agree?
Oh, of course, Adam. I'm on my way to the airport shortly. Gonna be in Vegas. Do you have any recommendations for me while I'm in Las Vegas for a couple days?
Honestly, all I know is that it's a dry heat, and I don't know if there's like beaches in the area, but for the most part, I haven't heard of a lot of, functional activities that go on in that region of the country. But that's just me. I'm a little bit East Coaster. Hard for me to wrap my mind around it.
Listen, it's gonna be a high of 72 degrees while I'm there,
There
so
we go.
not necessarily too hot. I'm actually
Come
looking
on now.
forward to getting around on the Las Vegas Strip and seeing what's going on.
I like the idea of mixing it up. I hear that there is a replica of something from Paris. Feel free to go check that out for yourself while you're in the city. Now, we remind you, of course, that today's episode is going to be brought to you by Personam. Why? Because Personam is an AI-driven cyber threat detection engine. Personam improves your vision into your network security environment and allows you to see cyber threats that other tools and platforms simply cannot do. Personam is always vigilant and always learning. Check out Personam today. And what we're checking out today, Andy, is the owners' meetings. Not usually a lot to get from this. Sometimes, you try to get some drips and drabs about where teams are thinking in the draft, or sometimes rule changes. A lot of discussion around that kickoff situation that they want to get rectified here in the upcoming season. But Brian Daboll, for the first time, tells you how he feels about the departure of one Saquon Barkley.
Well, let's set the scene. First, Adam,
Sure.
the owners' meeting this year, Orlando. Interesting choice considering they have always done it at the Breakers in Palm Beach on the water. So, it used to be kind of it's basically like the Pro Bowl when it was in Hawaii for the players. Like for the coaches and the owners, it's like a free trip down to Florida when it's still not nice in their respective cities. But they moved it from the beach to Orlando. It's, still
Universal Studios. Like the interview from Brian Daboll was actually done in front of the Jaws, which
I
I
was going
thought
to
was,
say
bold choice.
Epcot. Maybe they're going around trying different cuisines
Okay.
and different
Okay.
things, so that could be nice.
Yeah.
But usually during these things, this is actually the time where you hear kind of the regular answers from a lot of owners and coaches about how excited they are. A lot of times, this is where the framework gets done for a lot of deals that are going to be leading up to the NFL draft. Like, so are you really interested in trading out of that pick? Like, over a cocktail, and they'll kind of understand where teams are. Non-Giants news, you kind of hear Ryan Poles talking about like what he's looking for, how the offseason has went. He's obviously important because he's the first domino to go as the general manager of the Chicago Bears. Will they take Caleb Williams or not? That remains to be seen. Other things like Mike Tomlin from the Steelers coming out. Obviously, they've had a very busy offseason with the quarterback position, Adam. And, he talked about saying going into camp, Russell Wilson is the Super Bowl veteran, potential Hall of Famer. He's going to be the guy that gets first team reps. And that's when Justin Fields will be able to learn from him and maybe unseat him later. But noteworthy everywhere else. And then the Giants come in. And it's like, okay, what do the media want to talk to Brian Daboll about? And of course, the first thing is about Saquon Barkley. And I don't know if you have the quote in front of you, but why don't you give us a synopsis of basically what Brian Daboll actually said about losing Saquon Barkley?
Oh, of course. Quoted here when he was asked about him. I've got a tremendous amount of respect for Saquon and all the players that went on to other places. It's a special group when you're going through an NFL season. You got to go through ups and downs. He added, wish him all the best, except when he plays the Giants. Well, if we could, groundbreaking information, Andy. hey, he's a good player, and we hope he doesn't do well against us. If you want me to pull out the nugget where he says it's a grind of a season, like I think that is true, and a lot of NFL players talk about that. Like you're trying to win football games. From the outside looking in last year, of course, we're talking about this team stinks. What happened to the expectations? They just went to the playoffs. But inside the locker room, you have this idea that you're going to be able to go win football games. I think it's hard with Saquon specifically because the honest answer here, I'll give you that one because I think it's more interesting, would have been like, yeah, I do love Saquon Barkley. Honestly, I wish that he was playing somewhere else a year ago. Like we probably messed this up and it made it a little bit of a sloppier exit and parting of ways here than we either of us wanted it to be. And I'm disgusted that he's playing for the Eagles because it's really going to hurt our chances this season.
See, the first thing that I got from it, Adam, was like you could have inserted any player's name into his exact statement.
So
Like
sad
he
to
already
see him
had that
go.
crafted. Obviously, this is not a Saquon related thing that he was saying. It's like I've got a tremendous amount of respect for Jihad Ward or like Xavier
Xavier McKinney.
McKinney,
Yeah.
and everybody moves on, and we're a brotherhood, and we fought in the trenches with each other last season. I
Right.
wish them all the best, except when they play the Giants. Literally, you could say that about any player. It was noteworthy to me that there wasn't some kind of like acknowledgement about Saquon specifically, but it just shows that like this is the business of the NFL. We all thought it was a huge deal when Saquon goes to a different team. Kind of feels like internally, obviously, Brian Daboll talked to Joe Shan, was like, we're not going to be able to match what he gets on the open market.
Right.
So already prepare yourself for the fact that Saquon's not going to be here.
And remember too, like we said this all along. I said this when Joe Shane came in as the new GM. Like he did not draft him, so the sentimentality, the attachment to that player, and the feeling like you need to justify having taken them, that fades. That fades immediately when you walk in the door, and then production matters, and then replacing him matters. All those things factor in. But from a sentimentality standpoint, right? Like this isn't Eli Manning retiring from the New York Football Giants, right? And John Mara being emotional about messing the entire process up of moving him out for, can we believe it, for Daniel Jones, right? Like that's not what this is. This is just a really good player that I didn't draft, that I coached for a couple of years, that we went to the playoffs one year, didn't make the playoffs the next year, and he's moving on. And as I think to your point, like it is very generic, and I think that Brian Daboll is respected inside the building, and you've heard that players do like playing for him. But he is kind of similar to Joe Shane in that way. Pretty cold and calculated when it comes to discussing what needs to get done, what it's going to look like, and always leaving the emotional piece out of it. And, if there's one saving grace for John Mara in coming from Dave Gettleman to Joe Shane, it's that piece of it. Like Joe Shane came in and has a much more of a business, I think, like approach when it comes to making some of these decisions and these discussions. So that part of it, not shocking, but there's also another little nugget here from Brian Daboll.
Yeah, well, yeah, and just to wrap up on Saquon's piece,
Mhm.
it's also like, yeah, I was talking to some other fans and family members who are big Giant fans, and they talk about how different it is in New York if you don't win a Super Bowl. Like like the way that people view you if you play for one of the New York teams and you never get to the pinnacle of the sport, like
Mhm.
the expectations are that you have to get there. It's why Mark Messier of the Rangers has the gravitas that he does.
Sure.
And while people love Patrick Ewing, he never was able to get the Knicks over the top. And so when you look at these players, especially for the Yankees, who always want championships, you look at why Justin Tuck, OCU Minura, like there are these players that will live in infamy for what they did, reaching the ultimate goal. Saquon Barkley was here for 6 years. They won a playoff game, and he only got over 1,000 yards in half of those seasons. So it's
Yeah.
not like the impact that he had was one of those that's going to live on forever. He's a footnote of a great player that just never ultimately got the Giants where they needed to be.
And Tiki, right? Same position, very similar thing. And he's certainly very well regarded by the fan base, and he is the best running back in Giants history. I mean, all the numbers tell you that he is, but you left just before you got to those championships. And on Saquon, too, by the way, like again, because I think like we're going to talk about Saquon playing another 3-4 years. That's different here, too. Sometimes you mentioned Patrick Ewing. Well, yeah, he played his entire career, and then when he retired, it was like, well, what are we going to remember? He never got over that hump of leading this team to a championship. Saquon Barkley, by the time it's all said and done, yeah, like we'll talk about him as a Giant, but we're going to get a lot closer to 50-50 on in a Giants uniform and playing other places. And that makes a big difference here too, especially to the market. Like I think fans, you don't need to have won a championship to be very highly regarded by your fan base. If you spend your whole career there and you gut through things and you the good times and the bad times, and sometimes when you're a great player, you get looked back on and go, like maybe Ewing a little bit, right? why didn't we should have done more? What could we have done more to help Patrick Ewing win a championship, right? So those things definitely come up as well.
Speaking of doing a little bit more, Adam,
Here we go.
apparently,
That's a transition in the
yeah,
business, friends.
you like
Just
that. That's what we
wondering.
call transition in the biz. Doing a little bit more, we talk about one Daniel Jones.
That's
Obviously,
what a
he
dream.
has a lot to prove after getting the big contract, having the terrible, terrible knee injury after playing poorly at the start of the season. Obviously, the Giants and Joe Shane came out and said, we have to address the quarterback spot, not only because Tyrod Taylor's a free agent, but Daniel Jones is hurt. We got to figure this out. This offseason, Giants go out and they pay Drew Lock 1 year, $5 million guarantee. They're talking about Daniel Jones potentially being ready soon to be able to start practicing and seeing how that knee feels. But Brian Daboll was asked again after the Saquon stuff. He was asked about Drew Lock, Daniel Jones, how the quarterback room is shaping up. And what did Brian Daboll actually say about Drew Lock and Daniel Jones?
Oh, you better believe it, buddy. This guy, he gets the deal. We're excited to have Drew Lock, and he knows what his role is going to be. Daboll told the NFL Network on Saturday. He is going to get a lot of reps this spring. He needs to learn our system. And again, excited to get Daniel back. When he gets back, he'll be the guy. So what do we know? We know that they really like Drew Lock. They wanted to make sure they went and got him. He's going to get a lot of reps in camp because Daniel Jones, even if coming back healthy, is still going to have a timeline that runs into the training camp for his return. And Brian Daboll is supporting his GM, Joe Shane, in saying that Daniel Jones is the guy when healthy. I don't know, Andy. Lead this to because I have a certain way that I want to go with this. But I think that I guess it matters that head coach and GM are in lockstep in terms of the way they talk about Daniel Jones and the way they talk about their QB room right now.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like Joe Shane and Brian Daboll are very polished when it comes to the right answers on certain things. It is our expectation that Wink Martindale will be back as the defensive coordinator. Then you hear that he was throwing things, in the meeting and basically hopped on a plane, never to be heard from again from the Giants' perspective. You know, Daniel
He's
Jones
like
is our starting
Nosferatu
quarterback.
or,
Yeah,
Rasputin. You know what I mean? There's like this real aura around Wink Martindale. It whips the cloak across his face, and then you don't hear from him. Then he turns back up. By the way, he got some seismic amount of money, though, from Michigan to be their defensive coordinator. So even though it was like Nosferatu off into the shadows of the night, but it turns out he got probably the best payday he was ever going to get as a coordinator by going to the college ranks. Not that
yeah, had to take a step down, take a step up, take a little money, take a break. He'll
you
presumably
take the good, you take
be
the
back
bad,
in
you
the
take it
NFL
all, and there
in
you
no
have.
time. But
Yeah.
just the words, it is our expectation, or when healthy,
Mm.
or is like our guy until he's not our guy, feels like the way that both Joe Shane and Brian Daboll sat down at a table and was like, here are the words that we use to talk about these situations.
Right.
And so for me, it is interesting that they just keep telling everyone that Daniel Jones is the starting quarterback. Now, I've thought that all of the offseason moves that they have made and have not made have led me to believe the same thing. But it is noteworthy how adamant they are about Daniel Jones being the starting quarterback when he is healthy. If he is healthy, the expectation is he will be healthy for week one. Do you think they're being too adamant about this? Like, is it starting to get a little like, okay, we get it. Like, we understand what you're saying, but are you trying a little too hard to convince me or yourself?
Well, that's my thing here. And by the way, the little nook and cranny about this is like when Daniel Jones is healthy, he will be the guy. Now, they're not saying week one, Daniel Jones is the guy. We got some information over the course of this offseason that we think Daniel Jones should be healthy, should be able to get things going in training camp, and they think can be ready for the beginning of the upcoming season. Okay, fine. But they're now leaving that part of it out. So now it's about like, yeah, when he's healthy, then he'll be the starter. Okay. Is that week one, week two, week three, week four? And guess what? What does that give you? A little bit of wiggle room. Now, all of a sudden, well, a lot of reps for Drew Lock. He's going to, we know we're going to have that timeline in training camp. Lock starts looking pretty good, maybe has a decent rapport. If he comes in, I'll tell you this right now, like we know what it is. It's winning football games in the NFL. You're going to have a really hard time if Daniel Jones misses the first four games. And I'm not saying it's likely, but Drew Lock leads his team to a 3-1 record. You're going to go back to the guy that has injury concerns and that had a bad season a year ago and all this stuff. Like it's going to create an interesting dynamic. The Giants give themselves some latitude there, right? Because a lot of things are going to happen. Oh, who knows? The injury got worse. He didn't quite recover the same way. here's the more important. Oh, go ahead, because I got the
No,
more
no, no.
important piece.
Go on. I could see something. You're conjuring something up right now, and I could tell. I want to hear it. What
Here's
do you
what's
got?
happening. You love to talk to me about put your tinfoil hat on. Oh, they're talking about how interested they are in this quarterback and that quarterback in the draft. They want to move up all those things. But what they're not talking about is the wide receiver. And that's the most coveted thing that the Giants want to accomplish. And that's really where I should be. And I do tend to agree with you. I just don't always buy into how much the propaganda matters. But if we are buying the propaganda, then we should assume that Daniel Jones is never going to play a snap for the New York Football Giants and that they intend on drafting a quarterback. Because to your point, it's like, you're going pretty hard with this line here about a quarterback that you don't need to. This doesn't convey anything to anybody. No one believes that Daniel Jones is going to be particularly good this year. No one's 100% sure that he's going to be healthy this year. Maybe he will be healthy and maybe he will be decent. Maybe it'll be like 2 seasons ago. But the harder that you kind of put your foot down and say, when healthy, he's the guy, that's the expectation. Drew Lock knows his role. It makes me think Drew Lock knows that he has a good chance to play some football games for the New York Football Giants under center, and the Giants are not wholly confident about the player that now has had serious injuries under the new regime and has also had some difficulties on the field as well.
Okay, so I understand that thought process. I love it, by the way. That's fantastic. But here's the simple answer. Isn't Daniel Jones the starter or presumed starter until he's not? Like, this is what you have to say no matter what. Because, like, Daniel Jones is the guy. Guess what? At 6, they end up, one of the quarterbacks falls to them. They draft him. And you know what they say? Wow, we didn't think we were going to get ourselves into this position. We were able to draft a franchise quarterback. He's going to compete now for the starting job.
Okay, so I disagree there. This
Really?
is not a franchise quarterback drafted in the 6th overall. Daniel Jones is not built the same way. This isn't Jalen Hurts. Like, this isn't QBX where you're like, hey, he is the established player and we've had enough success with him that's the guy we want to win with. That's the guy we believe is going to be here long term. There is no world where the Philadelphia Eagles are picking at 6 and they go, we didn't expect to have a guy like this come up. We took him and he'll have a chance. It would never happen. So that in and of itself right there tells you everything you need to know about the premise that, no matter what happens here, it's presumed that Daniel Jones would be the starter for this team to start the season. It's not true. Because if you can tell yourself a story where they could be surprised by a player, but that's it. No, name another franchise quarterback in the league right now that you would have them draft a quarterback and it would all of a sudden they go, well, yeah, change the narrative. Or they be there at 6 and a quarterback's available and they go, you know what? Maybe Justin Herbert isn't the quarterback for the Chargers anymore. And now this rookie, there you go. Perfect scenario. I walked right into it. They draft J.J. McCarthy at 5 overall with the connection to Harbaugh in L.A. And they go, and he's going to have a chance to compete with Justin Herbert. It would never happen. Maybe they would trade Justin Herbert, right, and move on and restructure their whole team. That's all well and good. But there's no world where you would hear them utter the words, and JJ has a chance to compete for the starting job against Justin Herbert. You can say about any quarterback in this draft, you bring him in the door, he's immediately competing with Daniel Jones to be the starter.
I totally agree. I mean, Daniel Jones is not as established as some of the other guys that, even Justin Herbert, even though newsflash, Daniel Jones did win a playoff game, but his body of work is not as great as Justin Herbert. His health has not been as good as Justin Herbert. So clearly, if the Giants are drafting someone at 6 and they're drafting a quarterback, so to speak, then listen, what I think the answer is, and this is just like, he is the guy until he's not. Like, that's the simple way that you do this thing, right? Like, he is the guy.
And that's all that this is, though. If we can't get a quarterback in the top 6 that we really like, that we're interested in, we want to have said all the right things. So then when we go to training camp, they say, well, they told us Locke is here, he knows his role, and Daniel Jones is the starter when healthy. If they get the quarterback, hey,
that's where I wanted to like lay on this.
That's the tinfoil hat Andy wants to wear today.
Well, yes, because it's like, all of a sudden they drafted, Drake May falls to them at 6. Then it's like, we didn't know that we were going to get ourselves in this situation to have a primetime player like Drake May here. Drake May's going to have every opportunity during training camp to be able to unseat Daniel Jones. And you just know the second they draft the quarterback, if it's in the first round, it's just a matter of time. Is it in training camp? Is it 6 weeks into the season? Is it the start of next season? The clock immediately starts. They're pushing a button. But to me, I think it's fine to be as adamant as they are, Adam, because you do have Daniel Jones under contract. And if you don't get the franchise quarterback, he is the presumed starter. So, like, why not build it up until something changes or something is different? This is how you handle it until the situation changes. Then Joe Schoen and Daboll can say, well, things change. Guess what? 6 weeks ago, he was completely the guy we expected him to start. 6 days later, maybe he's not anymore because we have another option that's available to us. So for me, totally fine with pumping up your own players that you have under contract until things change. That's the way I like it.
Yeah, I think it's fine. Like, and I guess this is kind of like you and I when we talk about these things. I'm like, this is why I think it's all nonsense. The agenda is the agenda, and even no matter what you say out public, I guess this is another example of it. You talk about like, well, they're talking about quarterback, everything they can do to throw people off what they really want to accomplish, but no one's really going to buy into that. Just like this, name how many organizations around the league are like, wow, they are really bullish on Daniel Jones this year. Well, boys, go ahead and take QB off the needs board for the New York Football Giants. We don't have to worry about that at 6. Like you're examining every situation, and you have to take whatever you get, whatever gets communicated. You have to have that sense of it. And I actually think if we go back to, remember when they got Drew Lock, what was it coming out of Seattle? That little nugget was like, hey, this is another franchise telling you we know exactly what's going on. Like, you're not fooling us with this little gimmick you want to play about what's going to happen here. That Drew Lock was given some impression. Hey, man, you have a pretty good chance here to play some NFL games for us.
So I agree with you. And I don't think it's about fooling other general managers or scouting departments for other teams. Like, they do all their homework. They know how all of this works. What I actually think this is all about is the court of public opinion and making sure that the fan base doesn't lose or turn on the current coaching and general manager. Adam, think about it. If they don't say anything and they leave it open to interpretation that they could get a quarterback at 6, and a good portion of the fan base really wants that quarterback, and there's a quarterback available and they decide not to do it, all of a sudden people are going to they could turn very quickly on the coach and the GM and say, these guys don't know what they're doing. If you just soften the blow that says, guys, don't expect us to get a quarterback in the first round, at the very least, you're setting the expectations that you are not in that business. So if it doesn't happen, it's not as like, pitchforks are out with the fan base saying, why did you do that? Like, we needed this. Why didn't you do this for us?
Yeah, from a top of the draft standpoint, and like quarterback or not, it does make sense to be like, hey man, we don't want to communicate that we know we need to get the quarterback this year, because then if you don't, it happens every single season. What happened at the top of the draft? Were other trades made? And if other trades were made, I'll go ahead and compare to what the Giants didn't do. Should they have been in on that? Should they have been willing to, right? That's always a part of it, that the fan base is going to second guess ownership in the franchise about the decisions they make. The part where I think the Giants are making a misstep here is, I would say about 98% of the fan base does not care about Daniel Jones anymore as being a quarterback option for this team. So when you say what you say at the meetings about Daniel Jones specifically, like, I think you could be like, hey, we're obviously very excited to have Drew Lock here. He understands what his role is, and he's going to have a lot of reps this offseason. And obviously, it's a timetable we have to wait and see with Daniel Jones. You leave it like that, and you kind of let the fan base know it's all open. Options are available to us. When you kind of give this like commitment to Daniel Jones, even for the season, the fan base is like, Joey, what are we doing here? Like, what are you trying to do to us? Like,
Joseph,
come on. Exactly. Like, I think that there's just that part of it where it feels like you're like, okay, yes, keep your options open, but don't tell me that one of the options you're open to is the thing that we all agree is not going to be a part of the long term, right? Like, and I'll take it a step further, not to be totally negative on Daniel Jones. Even if Daniel Jones is healthy this year and does play games for the franchise, even if he's here beyond this season, even if he plays out this contract, in the big picture, he's not the franchise quarterback. And that's, I think, the reality that everyone understands and accepts. So even if there's this weird version of how the next few seasons go, that's what the fan base has come to the conclusion of. At best, maybe he's a bridge quarterback, but he's not going to be the quarterback. So we don't need some of the fluff when you talk about this guy. It's okay. Like, we've all come to grips with it. And by the way, you gave him the contract, but you didn't draft him. And that's really what's happening here, is Joe Schoen's like, I paid him. I gave him the money. Like, I know what I did.
Well, so Adam, so that's the interesting part, is that Joe Schoen was the one that paid Brian Daboll. He gave him the big contract. And Listen, I'm not going to debate the idea of whether John Mara stepped in and
We don't need
forced
that.
his hand and
Yeah,
forced him to do this when we just saw Saquon Barkley walk out, and no one says that John Mara forced him to do anything there.
right.
Um, so my thought on this is very simple. If you're saying that Daniel Jones potentially is a bridge quarterback at best, and everyone knows it, including Joe Shane and Brian Daboll,
Everybody
there's a
knows it.
big question about this upcoming season then, right? Because like we can talk about the future, we can talk about drafting a new quarterback, we can talk about what puts the team in the best shape 2 or 3 years down the road. I am of the mindset that I want to wait until we have the flexibility to move off of Daniel Jones's contract before I
Right. A
start
year from
the
now.
new rookie QB scale. That's just
Sure.
my opinion. Totally
And we
understand if
agree.
people want to go get him now, but I like the idea of getting more team control and being able to take that money and spend it elsewhere. We don't really have that luxury right now this offseason. To me, obviously, I think wide receiver is the biggest need. There's a glaring hole. They haven't addressed it at all. They've brought back Isaiah Hodgins. They've done a couple of fringe maneuvers, but they've left it open, knowing that they really have this area of need and they think they can go address it in the first what 3 rounds. If Joe Shane, here's a question: if Joe Shane gets to the past the 3rd round and has not drafted a wide receiver at that point, are you sitting here saying, what is he doing? Or like because we're assuming that he's going to go 1st or 2nd round with a wide receiver. What if all of a sudden we're in the 4th round and that's when we're thinking about wide receivers? Like, have we miscalculated how successful this offseason could have been?
Yeah, I guess like would you go back and say, well, should they have gone and whatever T Higgins, right, make a trade, something like that? Would you look at things differently if you did not get player X or Y? I will say that like it's hard because the top of the wide receiver room is so good and so talented on paper here when we come to this draft, right? The Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr. and Adunze, who you and I both really seem to be putting even above some of these other guys and likelihood of them being there for the Giants to take. It's hard for me to sit there and say, well, if you traded back and you missed out on all those guys, and then you took a cornerback in the 1st round, maybe, and you didn't get wide receiver until the 2nd, or like you say, maybe until the 3rd. I don't know. I think it would mostly signal a punt on 2024. So if we're talking about being competitive, I do think you need to add a weapon into this offense. Darren Waller's, a total mystery, and I don't think he's going to be here in the end. And you took away Saquon Barkley. So round it back to the top here. I talk about making this defensive front really, really good, right? Making them aggressive. In order for this team to be competitive in 2024, I would add in an elite defensive prospect. You can tell me wherever that's going to be. I would make sure to add a cornerback in the first 3 rounds. And I would say you need to add two weapons that you feel good about day one contribution. And arguably, the way to get there is to take a wide receiver high. That's your number one, makes everyone's life easier, and then wait and pick your spot. Tight end, maybe another wide receiver. Like I'll paint a scenario as we move forward towards the draft where 2 wide receivers coming in here is not completely out of the realm of possibility. And you can make a case that with the value, it actually could be the way the Giants should go. So I think you got to add an elite weapon, and you probably got to make what is strong right now even stronger on the defensive side of the football.
Yeah, so it's interesting. You went towards the defensive line. I'm a little bit higher on Jordan Riley than other people. I think that with Leonard Williams now obviously departing, Jordan Riley I think has an
Yeah.
opportunity to get more reps on the defensive line. You have Nunez Roche who's still there, but I think he's only signed for 1 more year. Jordan Riley's a little younger. I could see at some point maybe they're doing a little bit of a timeshare split potentially.
Sure.
So for me, I feel like we have at least enough rotational pieces there to be okay. The cornerback room to me still screams that we
Of
we
course.
desperately need
Of
someone. I
course.
mean, outside of Deontay Banks, right now ESPN.com has Trey Hawkins as the guy starting alongside of him, and we
Problem?
saw that he had one of the worst Pro Football Focus ratings of any cornerback in the league when he got starting time, and then got demoted and barely saw the field in the second half of the season. To
Andy, if
me,
you're going to trend negative, I don't know how we can have a reasonable conversation. I just, I mean, it's going to be hard.
well, Adam, listen, I'm just trying to be realistic about it.
No,
Obviously, we
it's
need
true.
another cornerback after signing. We re-signed Darnay Holmes. We're not necessarily sure what we have in Cordell Flott yet. Is he a starting guy? Is he a rotational piece? Aaron Robinson has been hurt. There's been a whole lot of changes going on over there. I still think this back half secondary needs some help. We have
Of
Jalen
course it
Mills
does.
starting at safety. We're going to
Yeah.
have to pick up a safety at some point, in my opinion. So there's a lot that needs to be done in the secondary. outside of wide receiver, that's where I really focus my attention. And I would be shocked if the Giants don't grab a running back in the 4th or 5th round to be able to come in and compete with Eric Gray and Devin Singletary. Not a huge investment, but some type of young, fresh legs that can spell Devin Singletary when we need it.
Yeah, 100%. So, and by the way, I ran in the background, ran a quick little mock here. If you talk about coming up at 6 and the Jets want to make a move up the board, they want to go ahead and grab, their offensive tackle to help them out there. If you just make that little move there, I can tell you at 10, it's going to be Arnold out of Alabama, cornerback, solve that problem. At 47, you can say maybe it's a reach, but I think Leget's moving up the board anyway. You take him, wide receiver, done, right? You still have 70, you still have 72. You make some additional moves here. But if you sit here and tell me right now, while I may think like, hey, let's make that defensive front elite, if you also tell me like we're just going to go ahead and make sure that we check key boxes here, that's kind of the both and. So when we talk about having a good 2024 season versus what does it look like over the next 2-3 seasons, that's where we get a little bit in the weeds. And that's why at the end of the day, we've got a long way to go before the draft to debate some of these guys and also give you key names that you can look at these positions that are going to fall into those right spots. And I think when we debate this idea of if you're not talking quarterback, that trade down opportunity for the Giants could be very, very big here in terms of what they accomplish in the short term. If you want to hear all about that, guys, get over to YouTube. One Giant Podcast. You go ahead and subscribe, turn on the alerts so you know when we're going. We're doing a lot of lives as we lead towards the draft as well. Get us over on the podcast feed. Biggest thing we can ask is to get over and support the podcast feed so we build up that side of OGP. It's greatly appreciated. Check us out on onegiantpodcast.com as well. We got some articles going up there, some different links and things we're going to be doing moving forward. And of course, at AndyMac214, at Adam Armbrecht, and at One Giant Podcast over on Twitter/X. But until next time, as Andrew Makowitz on a flight to 72 in sunny Las Vegas would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, Viva Las Vegas. Let's go Big Blue.